I'm Lisa Stone, and you are listening to Season 8 of Parenting Aces. Thanks for joining us on the Parenting Aces podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Stone, and we have a fascinating discussion this week with Dave Mullins. Those of you who have been following along Parenting Aces for a while now may remember past interviews I've done with Dave. He is a frequent contributor to tennisrecruiting.net's website, writing some very, very insightful articles on coaching, on player development. He is a former college coach, so he has a lot of insights as to what college coaches are looking for, and how families can maximize the recruiting process to get what they need out of college tennis, and in terms of development, in terms of overall growth, and also in terms of scholarship money, because let's be real, that's a big part of what we're after here in the junior tennis world. That carrot at the end of the journey is the college scholarship, and they're very hard to come by, but Dave has some great information on what we should be looking at in terms of player development, and I think you're going to really enjoy this week's episode with him. If you find that you're getting a lot of benefit out of Parenting Aces, either through our written articles or our podcasts or both, our social media posts, I hope you will consider making a donation. There is a PayPal donate button on every page at parentingaces.com, and no donation is too small. We appreciate all of it, as we are donor-driven and donor-supported here at Parenting Aces. So for those of you who have made a donation, thank you so much. And for those of you who haven't yet, I hope to add you to the list. But anyway, thank you for your continued support, and I hope you enjoy this week's episode with Dave Mullins. Dave Mullins, calling all the way from Ireland, thank you so much for joining us on the Parenting Aces podcast this week.
Hi, Lisa. It's great to be back with you.
Well, it's great to have you. And before we jump into the meat of the conversation, I sure would love it if you would give our listeners an update on what's going on in the life of Dave Mullins right now.
Oh, man, where to start with that one? So I retired from college coaching the summer of 2016. I moved back to Ireland with my family for a number of reasons. And we're really glad we made that decision. We're still unsure as to whether we're going to stay in Ireland or move back to America long term. But for right now, it's ticked all the boxes that we wanted to tick, making the move back to Ireland. So my wife's American, so she's had a little harder time adjusting than maybe myself and the kids, but she's done brilliantly. But what's going on with me from a tennis perspective? I'm actually pursuing my master's in sports psychology. It's always been a strong interest of mine, and something I guess you dabble in a lot as a college coach, especially. And I'm also serving on the board of directors for the Irish Tennis Federation, overseeing the high performance portfolio. So trying to add some value to their high performance setup here, and hopefully influence and help Irish tennis continue to move forward in a positive direction.
That's fantastic. You know, it occurs to me as you're talking about that as a former college coach, now working with high performance in your home country, you know, what is your thought about the young Irish players pursuing a college career before going out on the pro tour?
Well, it's something that I'm trying to educate as many people on as possible. I do some college placements. So I have a website, DaveMullinsTennis.com, where I do some college placements. So I'm working with maybe 7-8 players right now, just trying to help them through that process. There seems to have been a period of time, because when I grew up in Ireland, as I finished school in 96, 97, came over to the States in 98. Basically back then, your only option to continue playing tennis at a high level was to come to the States. And we had a good tradition of players coming over to some top programs in the States, and going pro out of college really wasn't talked about, really wasn't an option. The education system here is very tough. Parents are very strict about academics, and you're expected to finish school. You're expected to go to college. So it was kind of the standard, but it seemed to have shifted kind of over the last 10, 15 years, and less players seem to be going down that pathway. There's maybe some discussions around, well, if you go to college, you can't be a pro player, and but a lot of the players that weren't going to be pros anyway, and that shouldn't have stopped them. But yeah, it seems to be circling back around now, and they're a lot of the players and parents that I'm interacting with are very interested in, pursuing a scholarship in the States, or maybe even going over to England. England have invested a little bit more in their university system over there. And, from Dublin, we're about a 50-hour flight to London and to most places in Great Britain. So that's an option as well. Right now in Ireland, our country is too small. We don't have enough universities that, could offer the type of competition that players need. So yeah, it's definitely, it's been part of the high performance tennis culture here, and I think it's coming back around. And yeah, I'm thrilled that players are at least looking to the States as an option, because I'm forever a college tennis fan and love college tennis. Just because I got out of it from a coaching perspective doesn't mean that I'm not a fan of what it's all about and what it can provide to someone's life and future.
Yeah, you have made some incredible contributions, and to my listeners that are tennisrecruiting.net followers, Dave has continued to write some really, really insightful pieces for tennis recruiting. And that was kind of the impetus for this conversation, is some recent articles that you've published. And so let's segue into that. And the thrust of that is really how families are spending their tennis budget and how that relates to player development and coaching and getting the most out of young players, helping them reach their full potential. So I would love for you, Dave, to talk about your kind of philosophy around how coaching should look and how you see it from a financial perspective, from a family perspective, and from the perspective of helping kids achieve, the most that they can achieve.
Yeah, so the two articles you're referring to are, I named them a Shaky Foundation, Part 1 and Part 2. And I guess these are ideas that have been going around in my head for quite some time, and it's great that tennisrecruiting.net give me a platform to, put out some of these ideas on paper. But I'm always trying to look at things from several different perspectives. And now that I'm not coaching anymore, but I'm still very involved with high performance tennis, and I've got a 10-year-old son who's all of a sudden just the kind of the switch is just flipped for him, and all of a sudden he wants to play tennis every day. And so I'm looking at it from a parent's point of view. I have an older son who's very involved in high performance soccer. So I've got my parents' lens on. I've got my former coach's lens on. I've got kind of the administrative side of tennis. But I guess what really started with this article was that, and I don't want to get too anecdotal, or this was my, I did it this way, so you should do it that way. I hate when I hear people, focus too much on their own story. But I guess as a college coach, I was recruiting players that were coming to, whether it was DePaul University, Northwestern, or University of Oklahoma. Those are three colleges that I coached at. And these are, top players. These are, top, 5-star blue chip recruits, high ITF rankings, all the rest of it. And I guess, when I'd speak with them through the recruiting process and kind of what they're doing on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis, and many of them are at full-time academies, or they're, working with a coach on a daily basis. They're playing 3-4 hours a day. And then they'd come to college, and I'd be a little surprised that they weren't really prepared. They weren't prepared for the workouts in the gym. They weren't prepared for the intensity that was required on the court. They weren't prepared in terms of even the basics of getting ready to go compete, and then how they're evaluating their competition after they compete. And I'm scratching my head, and I'm thinking, well, okay, I understand why I wasn't prepared for college tennis, because I got maybe one lesson, one hour lesson a week. I played, 5 or 6 days a week, maybe for an hour, maybe for 2 hours, but there definitely wasn't a coach around. I had no, off-court input in terms of, conditioning or nutrition or anything like that. So I kind of understood why I wasn't prepared for college tennis, but I'm scratching my head as to why this, I guess, current generation weren't as prepared as I thought they would be. So I see parents, parents and players, they're investing a lot of money and a lot of time into their tennis, but they seem very unprepared, or they're not really getting the return on their investment, I guess, from a time and money perspective. From what I can tell, I guess I'd expect them to be more prepared. I'd expect them to be better tennis players as well. I mean, I'm also I compete now again since I gave up coaching. I love playing tournaments and league and stuff like that, and I'm competing against junior players or college players. And I'm holding my own just fine. And I'm like, well, I'm 40 years old. How am I competing with somebody who's playing, 3 hours a day, 7 days a week? So I'm scratching my head at all of this, and that's where this article came about. So to kind of get into the article, I'm asking parents to look at their budget, because I'm not about parents spending any more money than they're already spending. It's already an extremely expensive sport. I'm all about, save money wherever you can, but really drill down to, if you're making an investment in something, be very sure that you're getting the return you're expecting on it. And I think parents are throwing money at a lot of different things, whether that's, tennis coaching, maybe it's equipment, maybe it's tournaments or rankings, and they're just maybe following the crowd a little bit, and they're, well, so-and-so is doing this other player at this club down the street's doing this, and well, if he or she's doing it, then maybe I've got to do it. They've got, 3 hour or 3 lessons a week with their private coach, so we better do 4, or they're going to play 25 tournaments a year, so we better go play 30 tournaments a year. And they're not really drilling into, well, what does the player need? What really is going to make the difference in terms of the hours and the money that we're putting in? So I guess I'm asking parents to really think a little more critically about these areas, because I know they want to save money. I know they don't want to waste money. But I guess by the time their child is 18, or at least maybe I'm hoping this for my children, that when they're 18, that any input they've received from coaches or experts in any area, that all that's coming together to allow them to be prepared for the challenges of college tennis, and that they're able to, within the first few weeks, months, semester, really get a foothold and be prepared for the challenges that are going to come their way. So I can keep going, Lisa. Will I go into more of the specifics, or I'm rattling on here?
No, it's great. And I do want you to get more into the specifics. But before we do that, I wanted to just mention that I recently got an email from a parent who, the Australian Open isn't that far behind us now. And this parent contacted me, really curious to learn more about and I'm using air quotes, the Richard Williams approach to player development, and the fact that the Williams sisters did not play a lot of junior events, and now we see Naomi Osaka saying that, you know, she's kind of followed that model. We know Chris Eubanks followed that model. Coco Gauff has followed that model. You know, although she's still so young, I don't know that we can really put her in that category. But, you know, there are other ways to develop top players other than, like you're saying, spending money traveling to more tournaments. And I'd love to get your thoughts on, you know, what is it possible to bypass the junior competition system and still have a player develop to a high level?
I'd be lying if I said I know the answer to that. I don't. I mean, it's really hard because you'd have to have a lot of courage to be willing to bypass that system and go your own way. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to help players here in Ireland understand is that there isn't one pathway to a college scholarship. That they need to be getting results from a range of different sources, because I think before, a lot of our players, they felt like, well, they just had to go down the ITF path, that was the only way for them to get a scholarship, and that they would be based off their ITF ranking. And I'm trying to get them now to play a bunch of different tournaments. So they play the junior national tournaments here. They play men's and ladies opens where they can. They play league tennis. They go over to England and kind of piggyback off their system there with LTA tournaments, UTR tournaments, with Progress Tour tournaments. I know you had Barry Fulcher on talking about the Progress Tour, and so there's more Irish players going over there because we can get really cheap flights over to England, and obviously a very short trip. It's a weekend. You're not missing a week of school. But I'm also trying to get players within their club. Like, you know, I'm scratching my head when a 12-year-old has to fly to Poland or America or somewhere else to get competition. I'm thinking, like, even if you're the number one 12-year-old in Ireland, there's got to be at least 250 players that can still kick your ass because you're 12. And there's some 47-year-old at a club 5 miles away that probably looks awful, but can really, you know, give you a great match. And is that helping your development more than taking that trip to, over to Poland and maybe only getting 1 or 2 matches and spending all that money and that time and all the rest of it? So I guess, yes, you can bypass. You can't bypass competition. I believe that. It's another thing I'm kind of seeing in Ireland is that we kind of train 9 months a year, and then we squeeze all our tournaments into the summer, and we compete, for 2 or 3 months, and then we go back to training, and we train 6 days a week, and we never compete. Like, we have it backwards. That I feel like, well, I practice so I could compete. I didn't really like to practice. I just love competing. So I would seek out competition wherever I could find it, because that ticked the box for competition and practice. But I think a lot of players have now are hiding behind their training and their practice and maybe not competing enough. I actually have another article coming out this month on tennis recruiting that tackles some of those issues. So, but yeah, I know it's again long-winded answer to your question, Lisa. But I guess there's you can find competition all over the place if you really again think critically about it.
It's interesting because when I grew up, and I've talked about this a lot recently, you played anybody and everybody that was willing to get on the court with you. It didn't matter their gender, their age, their level. It was just the experience of being on a tennis court with somebody across the net. And I feel like, the player that is the junior player who does that is going to have a much more complete game, is going to be much better prepared to handle adversity, because as you mentioned, if you play the 47-year-old, it may not be pretty across the net from you. The strokes may be, in fact, quite ugly. The shots might be quite ugly. But as a junior, if you learn how to handle all of that stuff, you are so much better prepared when you're facing opponents, at the national level or at the collegiate level, because not everybody plays the same way. And the more diversity you can get coming up, the better prepared you are to handle that.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I really think that's it's a lost art, and maybe I don't know, maybe I'm being unrealistic with that, because child protection issues, and I don't know, like, yeah, I'd go take the bus, go play some at the age of 12, and go play some 40-year-old at a club somewhere, and wouldn't think anything of it. But something has changed within the culture, and there's a lot of things we could talk about in that, just our culture in general in the Western world. But there has been, I guess, people have been pushed towards more coaching, and that they feel like if they're not getting the same amount of coaching as somebody else, then they're not going to be good enough, they're going to fall behind, and all those other fears that people have. Whereas, yeah, maybe going and playing some unorthodox game style and replacing that with a coaching lesson, or maybe you pay somebody $15 instead of $80
right,
to run you around the court, and you've got they're serve volleying or chip charging at you, or so, I don't know, something. And you're trying to just figure out in your own mind how you're going to beat that without a coach standing behind you or sitting on the court, or trying to dictate how you should play and what decisions you should make. I just feel like we're robbing a lot of these kids of their autonomy within the sport, and we know that's in order for them to stay in the sport and enjoy the sport, that they want autonomy. They need autonomy, and yes, maybe their technique isn't perfect or ideal and doesn't tick all the boxes as to what we'd like to see, but maybe they're developing themselves in other ways. Maybe they're just smarter and more competitive than the next person, and they can kind of hide some of those technical flaws if they're not too major.
Right. Well, let's get back to the thrust of your articles, because I really want to delve a little deeper into that. The whole idea of looking at the pot of money that a family has available for tennis development and figuring out the best way to divvy that up. And you have some pretty clear ideas on that.
Yeah. I mean, it could go a lot of different ways. I believe that at different points in your life, you need different experts to come in and help you. And that's not necessarily just in tennis, but from a tennis perspective, that yes, at an early age, you definitely want to establish a good technique, and you don't want to have a technique that's going to limit you in competition, or is going to lead to injury or something like that. Obviously, we don't want that. But once that technique is set, like in one of the articles, I include the video, I think, of Nadal and Gasquet, and a couple of other players, Cilic maybe, and
Del Potro.
Yeah. And it's like, you look at these guys, and it's like they haven't changed a whole lot. Their technique is quite similar to what you see now on the television. And so yeah, obviously we want that technique to be set. But I guess what I'm encouraging people to look at then is, okay, well then you get to say age 13, 14, and there is a major technical flaw. Well then maybe, you want to hire a biomechanist to really break down that particular stroke, that maybe, your coach maybe isn't equipped to make that big a change, and maybe is relying on their eyesight, or maybe they know the player so well, and kind of just got maybe a little bit complacent through the years, and kind of the forehand say it was working, so we'll just leave it be, kind of thing. But maybe the grips got too extreme, or it's really breaking down under pressure or something like that. well, maybe it is worth just taking that chunk of money, maybe it's $500, and not doing private lessons and using that $500 to fix that shot and really get the feedback that you need. Or maybe it's not going to, it's playing 2 less tournaments, or maybe it's going without new tennis rackets or stringing your own rackets or something like that. But you're not adding that $500 on to the $5,000 that you're already spending. You're moving that money around. And then same as they, as they're getting more serious about their tennis, and they've got to learn about, how to strengthen their bodies, how to recover. And again, to expect a tennis coach to be up to date all the time on what they need or what advice they need to give to their players in these areas, and expect them to be experts, I don't think that's fair to the tennis coach. They want to be well informed, but they also need to be able to take a step back and say, you know what, you're losing matches because of your fitness, or you're losing matches because you're always getting injured. And maybe it's a good time to take a 3-month break from tennis lessons and go work with a trainer, get a program in place, get familiar with the gym, get familiar with what habits you need to build around recovering and preparing to play and all the rest of it. And then let's get you fit, and then we'll get back to our tennis lessons in 3 months. Now, maybe this is pie in the sky, and no coach would ever say that, but I would, as a coach, if I took a player as far as I thought I could take them, I'd absolutely tell them to move on. And I do believe there's lots of great coaches out there that would say, look, I've taken you this far. I don't have the expertise in this particular area. Let's sit down and talk about this so we can make sure that you're getting the feedback that you need. And we could apply that to sports psychology. We can apply it to nutrition. I just think, parents need to know that it's far more than just the technical coaching. These players need so much more than that, and not just for tennis, but for the rest of their lives. Like, if they understood how to set goals and to write down exactly the process that's required to accomplishing those goals, and you apply it to so many different things, Lisa. But I just think if they look at their budget, they look at their pot of money, how are they spending it, what is the return that they're getting on, what are the weaknesses, what's the stage of development, where do they need help, and maybe they want to divvy that money a different way to give the child really what they need to continue to develop. I think, and one of the kind of articles I have going around in my mind right now is just how stagnant so many players get. Like, let's say they're ranked 80 in the under 12s, their last year in the under 12s. And then they're ranked 80 again in the under 14s. They're ranked 78 in the 16s. And then they get to college. And I guess I'd see it from the college level, because I felt like so often these players would just get stuck at the number that they were at. Oh, he's a 5 player. She's a 6 player. And they stay at that number and they never break out, because they continue to do the same things they've always done. Right. And then they're wondering why they're not improving at all, because they've done nothing to break out of the habits that they formed. And it's like, oh, well, what we've been doing is good enough. We're kind of progressing, not getting any worse, kind of getting a little bit better, but they're not really great. They're not having that jump from number 7 on the team to number 2, or they're not going from number 80 to number 20. I know those things are happening, but I don't think they're happening enough, because I think people just get stuck in their ways from an early age. They don't mix things up. It's like going to the gym and doing the same workout every time you go. Obviously, you're going to get to a plateau very quickly. And unless you keep mixing these things up and throwing different challenges your way, you're really not going to get any better.
Dave, one of the things you just said about taking 3 months off to work on, let's say, fitness or the mental side of the game, I want to dig deeper into that, because I think a lot of parents here take 3 months off and say, oh my gosh, we can't do that. My kid's ranking's going to fall behind. He's going to miss this tournament and that tournament. And, junior tennis is such a short period of time. We can't afford to take any time away from the competition and the court and yada, yada. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, it relates to my last point is that, well, you're just going to stay stagnant. Yes, you're going to go to that tournament and you're going to expect to get to the quarterfinals because you got to the quarterfinals last time, and then you get to the quarterfinals and you're happy with that because you got to the quarterfinals and you got a few more points and you stayed around the same ranking. I guess sometimes you have to, again, bring it back to life. If you're far better off taking some time to plan, right? We get this idea, we get excited about something that we really want to do. Like I want to learn the guitar. So I go and I buy a guitar and I sit down and I buy a book or I get an online lesson or something like that. But I haven't really delved into, well, what's my practice going to look like? Am I going to practice 3 days a week? Am I going to practice 4 days a week? And at what time? Because pretty soon that excitement's going to wear off and I'm going to, put the guitar in the corner of the room. And so we've got to sit down and plan and be very deliberate about what we're doing. So if a player isn't really making progress, I think a lot of the first thing that the parents do often is, oh, well, we'll change coaches.
Right.
Well, it's probably not the answer. It's probably deeper than that. Well, why are they losing matches? Is it a mental issue? Is it a nutritional issue? Is it a strength and conditioning? Is it travel issue? That it could be so many different things. But I think we think about it on such a surface level, and somewhat simplistic level, and we don't really get beneath the surface and sit down and say, okay, well, I'm losing matches because every time I get to, 4-all in the first set, I start, freaking out about, am I going to hold serve or I start getting nervous and my racket head speed slows down and, okay, well, that's helpful. Well, is the tennis coach equipped to help the player with that? That's the first question you got to ask. Okay, well, no, the tennis coach isn't equipped. So where can we go or what service can we avail of that can help us in this area? And maybe it is worth taking. It doesn't mean that they stop playing tennis for 3 months. It just may be that they're instead of getting 2 lessons a week, they're getting 1 lesson a week, and the other lesson, that money is going to the mental performance coach or the sports psychologist. And for those 3 months, once a week they're with the tennis coach, once a week they're with the sports psychologist, and maybe after 3 months the player has some tools and has some strategies as to how to get through those nervy moments in a tennis match. And by taking that step back, they've probably taken 3 steps forward.
Right.
Because if that issue is not tackled, then that issue is going to stay with them for the next 2, 5, 10 years. And it's like, well, why not have just taken a few months out at age 14 or whatever to deal with that, so that they didn't have to deal with it again from that point forward.
Right. And, I can hear people listening to this and saying, but it's not supposed to be about results. We're not supposed to focus on winning and losing. And it occurs to me as I'm listening to you, Dave, that the way you look at the wins and losses is not about ranking or rating, but rather using wins and losses as a way to evaluate whether or not your child is making progress in their overall development. So as you said, if the child is losing every tournament in the 3rd round, what's going on that's causing that loss every time. It's not that we're upset that the kid has lost in the third round. It's that we're trying to figure out why she's losing in the third round. And if it has nothing to do with the way she's hitting the ball, what does it have to do with, and how can we address that and hopefully fix it?
Yes, no, I think you've articulated it extremely well there. Yeah, it is the results are some feedback, and it's we all need feedback, and ultimately they're out practicing, they're out training, they're out working hard so that they can go compete and figure out if what they're doing on a weekly basis on the training court is translating.
Oh, I just lost you, Dave. Dave, I've lost you.
Isn't the one they see.
Dave, I lost you for a minute there.
Yeah.
So you said, so what we're trying to do is figure out if what they're doing on a weekly basis on the practice court, and then you disappeared.
Okay. Sorry, a call came in there that must have kicked me off. Yeah. So the matches are feedback, and everybody looks pretty good on the practice court and is loose and hits a great ball, but it's really what is happening on competition day. And if these players want to advance, then they've got to analyze their competition. I guess that's the other thing that I would see with these 18-year-olds coming to college, that they had no real mechanism as to how to evaluate their performances. It was just, I lost, so I played like crap.
Yeah.
That was it, and you'd have to spend time with them to try and get them to understand that, no, I get that you lost, but you didn't play crap, and let's really get underneath the surface as to what happened out there, so that we can learn from it and then get to work tomorrow or the next day on fixing some of those things that didn't go your way this time. So yeah, it's definitely not about the rankings or the wins or any of that stuff, especially at the early ages. Okay, it gets more important as they get older, for sure. But it's a tool that you can use. And look, I say, okay, the player's losing in the quarterfinals each week. Well, each tournament's different, obviously, and the strength and of who they played and what their draw was and all the rest of it. But it's an example of I guess players do get stagnant. They get stuck into what they continue to do what they've always done. The coaches maybe are guilty of continuing to do what they've always done with that player. So the player doesn't have any new stimuli coming at them. And with that, they just kind of get stuck and don't develop to, I guess, their full potential.
Right. And, again, I mean, yes, the wins and losses are an important piece of the puzzle, but for the vast majority of our children, college tennis is kind of the pinnacle. That's what they're striving for. And beyond college, we hope they're going to continue to love the game and continue to participate in the game, whether it's through league play or playing open tournaments or whatever. But it's not life or death. And if we can help them continue to move forward in their development, maybe we can avoid burnout. Maybe by taking a step back and evaluating why they're not getting past a certain level in tournaments, maybe we're going to identify a potential injury that's waiting to happen, and we can ward that off and help them stay in the game longer term. Maybe it's a mindset, as you said, and maybe we can get them the assistance and coaching they need from a mental side that's not only going to help them win more tennis matches, but it's going to help them in their interpersonal relationships and in their professional careers once they're out in the quote real world, in a job. And so to use tennis as a vehicle to develop these young people into, these amazing, productive adult human beings, that's the goal.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it is completely, and we lose sight of that all the time. I mean, and this is what I see as well, because I hear people like even in my age, and they'll say, "Oh, sports was great. It developed me into the person I am today." And then I'll kind of challenge them that on them, a little bit, because it's kind of cliched and people say it, but I don't think I don't think coaches are explicit enough about the lessons that they're learning on a tennis court, the lessons they're learning from training and preparing to compete, and from competition, and then trying to tie that back to the real world and their future. I don't think people are being explicit, and we're throwing them out there for coaching, we're throwing them out there for competition, and we're kind of hoping secretly that they'll learn some good life lessons through this. But I don't think the kids are. I just feel like we need to be more explicit. I guess that's what I'm trying to do through my writing a little bit, and trying to tie it back to a lot of the time how this is going to help them, later in life. Because look, as a parent of, like I said, a 10 and 13-year-old, I could care less how good at tennis or soccer they are. They'll probably listen to this one day. Like they know I don't I don't care. I want them to get as much out of their time playing these sports as they possibly can. But I'm constantly tying back their experiences, because like my kids they have a great life. Again, we're middle class Western world people. There's very little adversity that our kids are put through.
Right.
And the sport field actually puts them through a little bit of adversity, which I'm so thankful for. And so I'm like, my 13-year-old now, he's developing some morning habits, morning routines, where he's getting up and he's stretching and he's rolling and he's doing some meditation before he even has breakfast. And that's a skill he's going to have for the rest of his life. He's going to know when he wakes up in the morning what he needs to do to feel good for the rest of his day, and have his body in a position his body and his mind to be prepared to tackle the day. I mean, those are habits that he's creating now at age 13, and that's been influenced by his sport and the people he's looking up to in his sport. Maybe it's been influenced a little bit by myself and my wife, but he's at that age where he's like, mom and dad, what do they know, kind of thing.
Sure.
But he's developing these habits because he wants to play at a high level. Now, whether he does or doesn't, is inconsequential to me. But I know that he's going to take all these lessons. He's eating better now. He's drinking more water. Like all these things that, you want your kids to do. And you hope that they develop these habits, these healthy habits, for the rest of their life. And that's really what we're using sport. And obviously in our case, we're speaking here today about tennis, and the listeners, that's really what this is, the tool that tennis can be for your kids.
I mean, and not only that, I've spoken before about the fact that, my tennis playing kid is no longer playing tennis. He has moved into music production. But I mean, he has even admitted, even though he still hasn't moved to that place where he's fully willing to admit the gifts that he gained from the sport. But even he has said, the patience that is required to kind of break into the music scene and music production and editing and all of that, those are skills that he developed through playing tennis. And while hasn't touched a tennis racket in over a year, he's still putting those skills to use in a different way, and a way that's bringing him a lot of joy, and hopefully will bring him some success down the road. And, you just never know where life's going to take you. But like you said, these positive behaviors and and experiences that they learn through sport can apply in a myriad of environments, not just being on a court or on a field.
Yeah, and that's good. It's brilliant to hear, and I think a lot of tennis players will have stories like that. And I guess I'm trying to, what I'm, I guess, hoping for future generations, that they have many different influences from many different experts. That yes, you want the tennis coach to be a huge influence and probably the number one influencer in terms of their overall game development. But wouldn't it be great to have a few other people in your corner that you're learning these other skills and tools that you can absolutely apply for decade, the rest of your life, because the forehand technique, like, that's probably going to help you up until whatever age you stop playing, at a serious level. Obviously you can play for hopefully till a very old age, but at a serious level, that forehand technique is going to be important. But it's the other things around the tennis that you're going to be able to apply for many years to come. So I guess, their mentors can come in many different forms. And like I said, even if it's finding that 40-year-old at a club who's just looking for a good hit and maybe played a bit of college tennis or something like that person could end up being a huge influence on your kid's life. So I guess, just being more aware of the bigger picture, and
Yes.
And having more holistic approach to athletic development. And like I said, we're speaking specifically about tennis, but I think any athlete needs to open themselves up to feedback from all different areas, because these sports are played at such a high level now, and the demands are great.
Sure. And to my listeners, I just want to let y'all know that I will have links to Dave's articles in the show notes on ParentingAces.com. So be sure and check those out and read the articles. They're not long, but they are chock full of wisdom and insight that I think it's important that we all read and understand. So, Dave, I want to switch gears really quickly because we're coming to the end of our hour. And you mentioned that you are going back for a master's degree and you're working on a thesis. And as you told me in an email, the theme of your thesis is college tennis coaches' views on the development of tennis players. I'm fascinated. I'm so excited to read this. And I'd love for you to take a couple minutes and tell our audience what that's about and what you're hoping to learn.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's been great to go back to college after all these years and get back into a more formal learning environment, and kind of opening myself up to huge amounts of I've access to all these research papers now that I guess I didn't even know were out there, but there's a huge amount of research in all aspects that you just can't believe that somebody's actually researched this particular topic. But as I was going through the research, I noticed that there was kind of a lack of research or quantitative analysis on getting the views of college coaches, not just in tennis, but in all sports. And I just love the college coach community. I just think they're a really switched on bunch that are trying to, they're trying to evolve beyond just, I guess, the tennis side of things. They're looking at, team building. They're looking at developing leadership. They're just looking at so many different aspects of developing, I guess, human beings. And so what I'm interested in is learning from coaches. It's not necessarily the most successful in terms of the traditional sense, like, tell me about the player who's the 2-time All-American and went on to, being top 100 in the world. I'm interested in that player that maybe was a walk-on in year one, and by year three was, playing number two in their lineup, or that player that was, started low on their lineup and then made their way maybe to number six, but just, we've all had players as coaches that that player is maximizing every bit of their ability, and they may never get anywhere near to playing number one, but that they're getting everything out of themselves. Like, I'm interested in that player, in that person, and I know we can't bottle it, but I'd love if we could bottle it and share it with as many kids as possible, so that they can learn from these players, because otherwise we won't learn about these players. There's never any stories or YouTube clips about that person at number six who's maybe going 500 but is maximizing every bit of their potential. So I'm interested to speak to coaches, college coaches, about that, and try and understand kind of the psychological characteristics. And then after talking with about 20 coaches or so, just pulling out the themes and see where that crossover is, and see if there are themes there, or if every coach has a different story to tell. But I would imagine that there are some themes there, and that there will be some crossover, and that maybe it's a piece of research that can be tacked onto something else, or it's a standalone piece that can maybe help coaches in the recruiting process a little bit, because if they know these are the general psychological characteristics that allow players to maximize their potential, then they can look for that more in the recruiting process. And then hopefully it's something that can help junior players as well, as they look to make the most of their careers, that they want to adopt some of these characteristics, or work towards adopting some of these characteristics if they don't already possess them.
I love that. I'm so fascinated, and I cannot wait to read your thesis once it's complete.
Thank you.
You offered to send it to me, so I'm going to hold you to that, and hopefully we'll be able to do another podcast once you're done with your research. And
cool. Yeah, I'd love that. I'd love that. I'll let you know. I'll start my thesis. I'm getting ready to put in my ethics review right now, so I hope to get going with some of the interviews in April, May, and then we'll spend the rest of the summer researching, pulling all those interviews together, and hopefully can come up with something interesting.
Fantastic. I'm sure you will. Well, thanks so much for coming on and chatting with us again. I always love talking to you. Forget the accent's fabulous, so that's always a treat. But beyond the accent, I love your wisdom and your thoughtfulness and your willingness to share that with a wider audience. And I just always look forward to our chats, and I look forward to your articles so much. And so thank you, Dave.
Oh, well, thank you, Lisa. Those are really kind words, and no, it's great. I thank you for reading them. I'm always shocked when people say they read this or read that, even here in Ireland. But it's really cool to get that feedback, and when I get that feedback, it makes me want to spend a little more time on these articles, and really give them some thought, and edit several times, so that the stuff that I'm putting out there, maybe sometimes I think some people, maybe it's a little hard and maybe a little too honest at times, but part of it is I'm trying to get their attention a little bit, and usually I finish my articles with something positive, but initially it might look a little negative, but if they keep reading, they'll see that my heart is in the right place. But no, thank you for all you do for tennis, and it's a vital service that you're providing. And I know, look, I come across parents all the time that are just, they didn't play tennis at a high level, they didn't play tennis at all, and they're lost. They're just walking around in the dark trying to figure out the whole tennis landscape and tennis scene, and help their kids the best they can. And so the people that you have on your podcast and the efforts that you put in are really helping these parents make that progression and help their kids in a really valuable way.
Well, that's very sweet of you to say. It's always interesting to me, and I learn from every single person I chat with. So it's definitely a two-way street. But again, Dave Mullins, thank you so much for your time. And to my listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. And we'll catch you next time on Parenting Aces. I'm Lisa Stone, and you've been listening to the Parenting Aces podcast. For tennis parents, by a tennis parent. If you like what you've heard, I hope you'll share the podcast with your tennis community. For all the information you need to navigate the junior and college tennis journey, be sure to check out ParentingAces.com.